Hello. Hi again. It's good to see everyone. Okay. Well, these sessions are proving to be a little bit shorter, so I think we'll just jump right into it. But first, I would love for our two distinguished panelists to give their personal kind of introduction, their story of just where they grew up, how they got into technology today, and maybe Danny, you could start, and then Taepyeonim, if we could have you afterwards, please.
Sure, absolutely. So I was born in the United States, hometown in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I've loved technology my entire life, particularly got into it because of Star Trek, and particularly Star Trek The Next Generation. And like many technologists, you know, we saw the future as a place of optimism, of a place where we can really accomplish and build the future we want to see. And so I was an undergrad at Stanford University in California. I was an applied math major. Continued to focus on tech. I've worked at startups. I've worked at Google. I worked in venture capital in Silicon Valley. And then I was also at KAIST for a year in Daejeon.
Being an old person, I need 30 minutes to do an introduction. Born in Seoul, grew up in London when I was a kid for 5 years, and then came back. I'm a history major, a Chinese history major. Did my undergrad at Seoul National, and then went to Hawaii, of all places, to do my master's degree. Came back, worked for Jungang Daily newspaper, Jungang-ilbo, as a newspaper reporter. And then I did that for 2 years, and then decided to go to law school in Portland, Oregon. Became a tax attorney in the US. Came back to Korea, worked for IBM Korea for 5 years, and then joined a company called NHN. And I was there for about 6 years, and then about 3 years ago, I joined KakaoTalk.
I nickname Sirgoo the International Man of Mystery. So I think it's really unique that we have these two panelists here today, because we have right now a real live unicorn from Korea startup in Sirgoo, and also Danny, who's written a lot about unicorns both in the United States and in Asia. Just for everyone's own, just to baseline everyone, the definition of unicorn is basically a startup that has reached equity value of above $1 billion. So Kakao, the last round was done at 2.4 billion, and then now it's trading on a secondary market in the 3 billion range. You know, I'd love to get first start with Sirgoo. What is the hardest thing about managing a startup that came from a startup that is now a quote unquote unicorn, that has grown up to become over $1 billion company, but you're still trying to be a startup and compete with startups? What's the hardest thing about managing that?
Just to grow in size, and then what that entails. I think you really need to keep the core culture of a startup, but then as you're growing, there's certain things that you have to lose, and certain things you have to hold on to, and trying to differentiate that, and trying to sow those values into the new employees that are flowing in. Currently, we have 600 employees now. When I joined 3 years ago, it was around 80 employees, and so we're growing at a very fast pace. And for any unicorn, I think that's what happens. And my previous experience with NHN was the same thing. There's this huge influx of employees, and then you know, there's a mixture of different cultures within the company, and then in some aspects you lose that startup energy, and you really need to hold on to that.
And Danny, you've seen this in the US, because startups are getting bigger and bigger now. They're not going public as early as they used to. There's now WhatsApp that got acquired for 19 billion, and it was a startup of, you know, and Beats is in the news of getting acquired by Apple for $3 billion. You know, what's the impact, you know, in the US of unicorns being older unicorns now?
Yeah. So I think this is a real large difference from the past. In the last 10 years, there were a total of 15 multi-billion-dollar acquisitions in the United States, total. But in the last 12 months, half of those took place, starting with Tumblr going to Yahoo, all the way to today, the rumors around Beats. And part of the reason that we're seeing sort of these larger valuations is not only that there's new capital sources from hedge funds, from Wall Street who are interested in delaying going public for a longer period of time, but frankly, the internet companies like Google and Facebook have really deep pocketbooks that they didn't have several years ago. And so for startups, there are a lot more options at the end of the road than there were just a couple of years ago.
And what does that mean for Asian startups, do you think? That you have companies like Google and Facebook and Apple that have deep pocketbooks now, even a company like Twitter that goes public and raises hundreds of millions of dollars. What's the implication for Asian startups?
Sure, I think the key here is all these companies are international companies. Facebook in particular believes that its next billion users are going to come from overseas. They founded the Internet.org organization to bring everyone online onto the internet to find those users. But that's just on the nonprofit side. For startups in Asia, there's an incredible opportunity to potentially join one of these companies because they're looking to expand into Korea, into Africa, into the Middle East. And Asian companies can absolutely be at the center of that revolution for those companies.
And Sirgoo, how do you think about competition on a global scale? You know, do you think that your biggest competitor is the Facebooks or the Googles of the world, or is your biggest competitor yourself, essentially?
You know, internally within our company, we say that KakaoTalk's greatest competitor is Kakao Story, because you only have a limited amount of time, and then rather than chatting, a lot of people now using Kakao Story. But definitely yes. Services now, it really doesn't matter where you operate from. You can download these applications anywhere in the world, and our Korean users also can go into Google Play, go into App Store, and they can download these international services, and all these different services compete. So in a sense, we are currently competing with the likes of Facebook, Google, and what have you.
And Danny, what advice would you give? I mean, you've spent time now in Silicon Valley. You were at General Catalyst, I believe, as an investment partner at one point.
Yep.
So you've been around the block. You've seen what it's like, and you've seen the Korean startups. What from your perspective, are some things you would that have maybe surprised you on the upside, and maybe things that you would suggest that Korean startups maybe work on in terms of trying to reach that next unicorn potential?
Absolutely. I think on the upside, the first thing I really look at is output. And when I look around Korea, I see multiple unicorns just this year alone. And if you go back a generation, you have a whole group of companies like Naver, Dom, Nexon, NCSoft, all of whom are unicorns in and of themselves. And that is really rare. You know, a lot of Koreans I talk to talk about Israel as the startup hub they want to emulate. But Israel has never had a billion-dollar exit in their startup ecosystem in their history. The closest was Waze at 966, almost there. And so there needs to be more confidence on this. You've already accomplished so much, and you should learn from each other because the success stories are already here. I think the challenge for a lot of companies here is building the product and staying product focused. I think the number one flaw I see in a lot of companies here is that they're service businesses. They're somehow scaled based on the time that the founders or the employees are putting into the business. It could be consulting or marketing, et cetera. And the unicorns, absolutely every single one of them, are great products and great product businesses that are built around something that's scalable. It could be an app, it could be an online portal. And so I think for CEOs here, focusing on that product is the key to success.
And 대표님, so what do you think are some of the lessons learned from previous Korean startups that have tried to go global and failed? And and it's not of their fault, particular fault to them, but just what are some of the lessons that you guys try to take with you as Kakao now enters the global stage, or has entered the global stage?
There's this magical sense when we say global, especially in Korea. It's this fantasy of this big market where everybody thinks the same, everybody speaks English. But in reality, it's tens of billions of people who speak different languages, have different cultures. And especially when you're running a service, service is culturally sensitive, and so you really have to focus on a specific region, a specific culture, rather than saying something is global. I think our colleagues in Silicon Valley have it lucky, have it better than us, because there's an advantage of launching your service from Silicon Valley. The world can sympathize with that, and so it's more easier to spread your service if you launch in Silicon Valley. But Korea, I think the reason why Line was so successful overseas is because they focused on a specific country. They had 10 years of experience in Japan, and that really brought on their so-called global success, because they were so knowledgeable and culturally sensitive to the Japanese market. And so when these startups want to go global, I think you really have to focus on a specific country or culture.
And I want to go back to the Kakao example, because I think it's just it's such a darling of this country in many ways. You know, what are some of the things that Kakao does differently, the Kakao way? Well, for example, I know that, you know, within the country, everyone has on their desk just their first name, or an English name, actually. So Brian or Vino or Dean, you know, which is very non-traditional within Korean companies. You know, what are some of the things that you guys try to do intentionally so that you can compete at the speed and the veracity that global companies compete at?
Externally, as I mentioned in my presentation, we continuously try to communicate with our users and try to fathom what features they want, what services they want, and incorporate that into our service on a regular basis. That we do with our customers, with our users. Internally within our company, this mobile industry is new, and so a new employee might have a better idea than myself or one of the senior employees, and so we've tried to take out any sense of authority. And Korean society is really based on having authority, and you know, title is very important. So we try to take that out, and we all call each other. We make them come up with an English name, and so everybody is on a first name basis. And I think that's a very small change that really encourages free communication within our organization.
And this is my last question, formal question, and then I want to open up the questions to the audience, so if everyone could start preparing questions. But this last question is to Danny. So you've seen the volatility in the market recently.
Yeah.
There's a lot of beta, as we call it, the extraneous volatility in technology stocks. Box supposedly has removed their filing to go public, which has been a you know, kind of a shock to the industry. What's your take? What's the impact of this of the volatility on current unicorns or potential unicorns all over the world?
Absolutely. I think when you look at the length of time it takes to build a business today, in 1990s it was an average of 4 to 5 years to go public. Today it's edging up to 9 years length before you get onto the public markets. And so no matter when you start a business, you are going to go through a business downturn. And so the companies that are sustainable, that build up a revenue model that works for them, that have long-term partners on board in terms of investment partners, business development directors, et cetera, those are the businesses that can survive for 100 years potentially, as Evernote's CEO likes to call it. And so I think, you know, when you look at the volatility, I think the CEOs who were really prepared, you know, were prepared for this to happen anytime. And the fact that it's happening now is not that big of a deal. So I don't think a CEO who's considering starting a business should be worried about it. They're going to have to go through one of these no matter what.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have time for questions from the audience. So I think there's some microphones out there. So we'll start with this gentleman here, please. Do we have a microphone for this gentleman right here in the blue shirt, please? Thank you.
Hi, good morning. This is David from Taiwan. I just want to talk about what Eric you have mentioned. And this is a question to three of you. Do you think an entrepreneur could be successful, but if they don't have a calling? And do you think there's people have a calling but not successful? This is referring to what Eric was saying, but I think it's very relatively to three of you through your experiences. Because back in Taiwan, the ecosystem is very preliminary, and we are preaching about calling, but against the traditional Asian culture, calling is not something that you teach at school.
Well, I'll take a quick stab at that, and I'd love to pass it on to our panel. So I did two startups before two technical startups before I got into the investing business. And both of the initial ones, I would say, were not particularly fulfilling a higher purpose. And I wanted to start a company. I wanted to be part of a startup. I wanted to do something new. And it's really taken me almost 12 years, actually longer than that, to kind of find my true calling today. So I think an entrepreneur can be very successful, inordinately successful, without having a calling per se in mind. It's just my personal hope that in the world that we live in today, with all the need that exists out there, that people can start to tie the two together. So I absolutely think it's possible, but I think we can strive for even something greater.
You know, I think that the best entrepreneurs are obsessive about their products, their businesses, and what they're trying to do. That doesn't mean it's a calling, and I agree with Eric. I don't think every entrepreneur wakes up every day and says, God, this is what I really thought I was going to do every single day in my life. But they have an infectious obsession with what they're doing. And so sometimes you don't start with a calling and you end up at IPO with a calling. So
when I joined the company about 3 years ago, and our founder, Brian, at the time gave me a call. I was working for NHN at the time. And he said, we'd like you on board. Why don't you come work for us? And I said, my first question to Brian was, well, how are you going to make money? Because at the time, that was everybody's concern. How is Kakao going to monetize on this chatting service? And so naturally, for myself, I asked him, how are you going to make money? And his reply was, he didn't mention a word about making money. And what he said was that when he worked for doing web services, he regretted that he wasn't able to look beyond his company. And so when in the mobile business, because it was in its infancy, he wanted to build a strong mobile ecosystem. And he wanted to grow this industry. And he said, I need your help to grow this industry, and not just his company. And that was a real shock for me. And I don't know if you can call that a calling, but Brian really had a higher meaning to running this business, and so that's why I joined the company. I think that there's a certain power in having a calling in doing your business.
That's an amazing story. Thank you. Other questions for the audience, please? Right here with the scarf.
So I have a question about going global. Because of it can be culturally sensitive, Sirgoo mentioned that we have to target the specific region, and that's how Line got to be famous in Japan, etc. Right? But I'm wondering if this applies to every product and every service. So, for example, say if I had an idea and I'm only targeting for the final end users that have the very same demand for a specific product, then isn't everyone in the world with the same demand are all the same, or is it more tricky than that? Like you've got to balance with it. Am I clear with my question? Or?
I think so. My guess is it's very case by case, but do you want to try to answer that question?
Yeah, if you have a great idea and you think everybody in the world's going to use it, go for it. Best of luck to you. But what a lot of Koreans tried to do and failed was the understanding that it's not just about features. It's about the color of something. It could be a certain function that really doesn't appeal to the users. It could be the UI, the UX. That if you look at it, it seems very alien. It's things like that that really play into whether or not somebody uses that service. I hear a lot of talk about Cyworld being Facebook's predecessor, and how Korea came up with the first SNS service, but these Americans they didn't use this service. But it's a totally different service. The functions might be similar, but for an American to use Cyworld, there's a certain resistance to that, and where that comes from is really culture. And so we really have to think about not just the functions, not just the technology, but a whole lot of things that go into making a service.
I think we're unfortunately out of time, but I think we should really give a big round of applause for our two panelists here, Sirgoo and Danny. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.